I want to thank everyone for joining our first inaugural Grand Challenges Symposium. Over the last few weeks and months, many of you have been going through different types of research projects from AI to ESG to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're so excited to see you showcase the amazing work you have been doing, as well as sharing the mentoring and coaching you've gotten from our amazing faculty and alumni partners. To kick things off, my name is Nima Farshchian. I'm the director of the Center for Social Value Creation. A little bit about myself for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting. Before I was the director of the center, I actually did both my undergraduate at the University of Maryland Smith School and my MBA at the Smith School. So Smith has been a home for me through and through. In between, I worked in charter schools and helped found the first computer science focused charter school in Washington, D.C. at a middle school level. I'll pass it over to Joanna, who all of you know very well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nima, for the introduction. My name is Joanna M., and I'm currently a rising junior at the University of Maryland, studying information science and operations management and business analytics. I'm currently the project manager for the Research Impact Fellowship, and I just want to thank you all for your support and for all the students for all their hard work. And yeah, I'm excited for tonight. And I'll pass it on to David to introduce himself as well.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm David Kirsch. I've been happy to be involved with several of you at various points during the course of the summer, and very much looking forward to seeing how your work has developed.
Fantastic. A little bit about the center as we get started. The mission of the Center for Social Value Creation is to educate, engage, and empower our Smith community. And the way that we're excited to showcase this through the Research Impact Fellowship is what you have learned, where you've experienced the different ways that business can be used as a tool for good, and empower you to take this further in the next step from students into your future careers as industry leaders. We love that you're getting both thought-provoking dialogue, thought leadership, and hands-on experiences through these projects. And we're excited for you to share amongst your other peers who you might have seen in the workshops, but might not know exactly what they've been up to for these last 2 months. And we are so looking forward to all the work that you have done so far, but what's to come from these research projects you've been working on. For the Research Impact Fellowship, for those of you who are new to the program and tuning in for the first time, our students, where we've had 13 different students working on 10 different research projects, have had these deep analytical approaches. They've gone through coaching sessions from many of the faculty you're seeing on this call, and they've understood different ways that we can create social value creation through the work as business leaders in industry. We want our students and our community to be inspired to come up with creative solutions. And soon in a few months, we're going to be publishing all of the research papers associated with the presentations you'll be hearing tonight in our first inaugural Grand Challenges CSVC Research Journal. We're very excited to hear more of the work that's coming, but we want to thank all of our Research Impact Fellows for the work they've done this summer, as well as our partners. I'll pass over to David.
Thanks, Nima. So I think you see the numbers here on the screen, the number of workshops, the number of students, number of faculty, number of projects. I think if we think back at least to the workshop that I facilitated about sort of what is research, I think what's impressed me based on what I've seen is how each of you have brought something new, what research is, new knowledge to the world. You each brought some new knowledge to the world and are now prepared to share that with us. So that's wonderful. And I think the other word I'd focus on is impact. The impacts are both for our understanding of business and society, but hopefully these are also impacts that you feel that you take forward into your kind of professional developments and your next steps. So the impacts aren't just one way, they go both ways. And we're really excited to see more. Joanna, I think you're running the slide, so maybe if you want to jump forward. So just to set the stage for the next sort of hour and 50 minutes, we'll have 10 projects. 6 to 8 minute presentations. Joanna, I'm going to assume that you will be keeping time. And I'll encourage everyone to keep the presentations short so the conversations are a little longer. And make sure we do get a little time to talk about what you've done. And we're really looking forward to that. And take it away.
Perfect. Thanks so much, David. Our first presentation will be coming from Eleanor Spies and Christopher Chen. The title of their research project was The Sustainability of Fast Food Packaging Due to the COVID-19 Pandemic. The research project aims to evaluate the state of sustainable packaging initiatives of the American fast food industry during this pandemic. I will let you all take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Can you
This
all
is
see
our
the
summer.
screen? Sorry. Okay, awesome.
Thanks. This is our summer research project on the sustainability of fast food packaging during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Eleanor Spies, and I'm a rising senior at the University of Maryland studying economics.
Hi, I'm Christopher Chen, and I'm a rising junior at the University of Maryland studying management.
We would like to thank the Research Impact Fellowship Program staff and the Robert H. Smith School of Business Center for Social Value Creation for this opportunity. And in particular, we'd like to thank our mentor, Dr. Rosalina Ferraro, an associate professor of marketing at the Smith School, for her support and guidance throughout the entire project. So first I'll go over the agenda for the presentation. I'll start with the intro and background on our topic, and then Christopher will speak about the methodology we used. Then we will review and discuss our results and end with the conclusion, followed by a brief Q&A session. So as defined by the Environmental Protection Agency, packaging consists of products that are soon to be discarded the same year the products they contain are purchased. It comes in many different forms and sizes and can be made from materials such as plastic, paper, styrofoam, glass, and aluminum. According to the EPA in 2018, containers and packaging accounted for 82.2 million tons of municipal solid waste in the United States. So our research project focuses on the fast food or quick service industry. Some common sustainability initiatives that companies in this industry implement include strengthening their recycling and composting programs, sourcing more sustainable raw materials, and incorporating reusable packaging instead of single use. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed a significant trade-off between public health and the environment. Some companies began implementing unsustainable practices. For example, Chick-fil-A switched to serving all meals in paper-to-go bags. Through this project, we aim to evaluate the state of sustainable packaging initiatives in the fast food industry during the COVID-19 pandemic. So using this data, we can develop an idea of the direction that fast food companies are heading in terms of sustainability. So first, we conducted a literature review and collected relevant studies from the past 2 years. The studies revealed that there's been a lack of research carried out on the sustainable habits of companies in comparison to the consumers. We also discovered that most research did not focus on the United States. And lastly, the majority of research on the COVID-19 pandemic focused on waste from personal protective equipment rather than packaging.
Thank you, Eleanor. So for our research, we decided to select a secondary data analysis for our method. We analyzed publicly accessible published company information on food packaging initiatives for American fast food companies. Company information can be in the form of press releases, news articles, reports, and other publications on companies' websites and other related websites. Our research focus is limited to food companies in the United States. Our sample is based on the 2020 QSR Top 50, a list of the top 50 fast food companies in the US, which is based on 2019 sales. We chose this report for convenience purposes as it provided us with a large sample, and we conducted a comprehensive online search to identify packaging initiatives for each of these 50 companies. For each company, we aim to identify ongoing sustainable packaging initiatives, any progress on these initiatives, new sustainable packaging initiatives, and finally, new unsustainable packaging initiatives.
So now we're going to go over results and provide some analysis. The first graph, figure 1, shows that out of the top 50 fast food companies in the US, 21 companies or 42% have ongoing sustainable packaging initiatives. We didn't find any publicly available information for the rest of the companies. The following graph, figure 2, shows that out of the 21 companies that have ongoing sustainable packaging initiatives, 11 of them, or 52%, have made progress on them. And the third graph, figure 3, shows that 29 out of the 50 fast food companies implemented new packaging initiatives during the pandemic. So 15 of them implemented sustainable ones, while 14 companies implemented unsustainable ones. In addition, 4 companies implemented both sustainable and unsustainable initiatives.
Figure 6 shows that 5 companies with ongoing sustainable packaging initiatives implemented unsustainable initiatives during the pandemic. And lastly, when analyzing both ongoing and sustainable initiatives, we found that 13 companies are implementing initiatives to target the reduction of plastic packaging, 12 companies are targeting the reduction of paper packaging, and 4 companies are targeting the reduction of styrofoam packaging.
So now we'll move on to the discussion. So some of the limits of this research included the lack of information readily available to the public on sustainability initiatives. Complete sustainability reports were only found for a few companies. So instead, the majority of information came from company press releases and news articles. We also didn't take into account any unpublished packaging initiatives, so it may impact the precision of our results. And then this project was also conducted during the pandemic. So this time frame limits the amount of information available to us. But future studies should analyze a larger sample of fast food companies so that the results can be more accurately generalized to the whole industry. Researchers can also request information directly from companies and can even interview with company representatives. Future studies should also examine the sustainability initiatives implemented after the pandemic significantly subsides, and then a comparison could be made to see if the state of these initiatives significantly changed before, during, and after the pandemic.
So overall, we concluded that the state of sustainable packaging initiatives of American fast food companies during the pandemic revealed that although companies are continuing to focus on sustainable packaging initiatives, they have also implemented new unsustainable initiatives. The key takeaway is that throughout the pandemic, companies implemented an almost identical number of unsustainable packaging initiatives as sustainable packaging initiatives. Our research opens the door to future studies and explorations of the direct impact of the pandemic on sustainability of the fast food industry. It is clear that a sizable portion of the top 50 fast food restaurants in the United States have shifted their focus away from sustainability. To conclude, we hope that unsustainable initiatives are only temporary in nature and companies can adopt a new, fresh start to sustainability. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thanks so much for the research team. I had a quick question for you guys regarding the reports you were saying and how 21 companies had reports posted, sustainability reports. Did you do any quality control of, is this an accurate report, or are they just putting out a greenwashing report out there and saying it? So for instance, are they just saying we have a new green initiative and they just put one recycling bin in one store? And how did you have quality control for the reports? Also, great presentation. That was a fantastic job.
Yeah, we had a very pretty much like vague criteria when it came to looking at information. Most companies, the majority of our initiatives that we found were pretty broad and large, widespread. So kind of like initiatives that could be applied to all the stores. But at the same time, some of these initiatives were more pilot programs. So they're on a smaller scale. But with our research, we kind of saw everything as an initiative and just included it as part of our numbers.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Can I ask, I'm assuming that the companies that were pursuing unsustainable packaging didn't advertise it as such, right? They called it something else, right?
That's correct.
What did they call it?
Often it was like COVID updates because it was, related to the pandemic. So they were usually like health
health safety updates or COVID updates. It's the majority of where we found those.
And do you see were there any of the companies who had, by the time that you're looking at this, sort of brought health and safety together with sustainability and sort of been able to do both?
So that's an area that we kind of didn't see. We didn't look at the specific link between those two. What we can say is that a lot of the unsustainable initiatives were backed by health precautions and those kinds of reasons. So I think that is definitely an area for future research, specifically like looking back after the pandemic ends. But yeah, that's an area that future research could look at.
Yeah, and I would also add that most companies weren't able to incorporate like health and sustainability. It usually just was more an initiative that was more waste in general.
Thanks.
And for Q&A, anyone who has a question from the audience can just hop off mute and ask away. Seeing none, we'll move on to our next presentation. Eleanor and Christopher, thank you so much for your amazing work. And we'll be excited to see the full report in our journal when it comes out in a few weeks. Next up, we have Ronit Toladur his project is on a multiple case study on social media influencers are the culprits for the latest developments of cryptocurrency pump and dumps. His research projected investigates cryptocurrency pump and dump scams and the rise of social media influencers' involvement with these scams. Ronit, I'll let you take it away.
Hi guys, so I think hopefully you guys can, okay. So yeah, my title of my research project is titled How Social Media Influencers Are the Culprits for the Latest Development of Cryptocurrency Pump and Dumps, a multiple case study. Before I do actually get into that, I do want to introduce myself. So my name is Ronit. I'm a rising junior studying finance and OMBA. And I do want to give a shout out to everyone involved. So thank you for making this summer pretty memorable. So a quick agenda. I'll start off with kind of some background information. What is a pump and dump in kind of the crypto context or cryptocurrency context? How is it influencer involved in this process? And then go into a little introduction of my topic, my guiding research questions, a quick literature review. And then from there, talk about my methodology, that being the case study, the process behind that, and then lead into my findings and kind of give two examples of coins that I study, that being MILF Token and Bank Social, and then kind of finish off with my closing thoughts, future research options, and questions if you guys have some. So some background information. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about pump and dumps within kind of like the equity market with stocks and whatnot, but it's just as popular within the cryptocurrency sphere. This is really due to kind of a lack of regulation within the industry, just because kind of crypto's booming at a rate that regulations can't keep up with. So going into the actual process of the pump and dump within the cryptocurrency industry, how it works is it usually occurs within a group chat on social media platforms like Telegram and Discord. And there are group leaders that send out a message, a pump and dump event message, listing the time the pump will occur, the coin, and the exchange that the coin is on. After announced, group members then kind of flock to these exchanges and begin to buy the coin. And the hope is that once the price rises, group members can then go out and promote the coin on various social media platforms through misinformation, and then dump it off onto unsuspecting buyers. But really what ends up happening is the group members often become the victims, as the leaders have already pre-purchased the coin prior to the message being sent out, right? So then following that initial rise, when that message is sent, the group members are the ones that kind of getting dumped on in a sense, right? So as you can see, kind of the group leaders are the perpetrators, the market manipulators that get in around here and dump off here. And the members who think they're getting in here often are getting in here, right? And so where does the influencer kind of fall into play with this? There's really two main roles. The first role is kind of that initial investor, right? So I would say that role kind of falls under that perpetrator, market manipulator. They are involved in the pre-sale of the coin. They're involved in kind of the entire process of the coin. And then the secondary role is kind of a marketing role. This is when a coin is already established, so has already come out, and then post-launch, a couple of days, couple of weeks after, deployers or developers of the coin go out and reach out to influencers to kind of market this coin through a promotion, whether it be through money or they give them X amount of altcoin, right? So kind of I really wanted to focus for my study. I really wanted to focus on like the influencer role, just because I feel like that is kind of where the impact lies. So looking at my guiding research questions, the main impact was really, or kind of my main questions were, what impact can a social media influencer have on the launch of an altcoin? What impact can social media influencers have on an existing altcoin? What tactics do they use to market their coins or their respective altcoins that they're backing? And does more influencers involved equal a higher market cap, right? So is price going to go up or volume going to go up with more influencers involved? And if you look at these visuals, these are the three coins that I did investigate. I have the respective influencers that were backing these coins, and you can kind of see that the scale at which these are operating, they're in the millions, they're in the 100,000s. It's an extremely large scheme, that is being operated upon, and it doesn't have a lot of coverage, which is kind of the main motivation behind researching this topic for me. And so so going to kind of quick literature review, currently a lot of the literature published on this topic focuses on that standard cryptocurrency pump and dump that I mentioned with the Telegram and the Discord, and doesn't highlight influencers involvement because it's kind of a fairly new event, right? And in terms of kind of the methods that are being used, a lot of them follow that same observational case study that I tried to replicate, as well as longitudinal studies where they gather a bunch of events spanning across a couple of years and kind of investigate those events. Sorry. So moving to my methodology, the first step is really to kind of research these coins, like figure out what makes an altcoin, figure out the criteria for who is, or figure out the criteria for the altcoin itself, who's involved, how many followers are being involved, what platforms are used, etc. Right? Those kind of logistics, right? And the second step is really to gather charts from kind of accredited, cryptocurrency trackers for the coins that I ultimately selected, right? So report, and with those charts, it was kind of my goal to record important measures, things like price high and low, volume high and low, market cap, things that I can find, kind of dissect and find trends within that. And that kind of leads me to my third step, right? So it was to kind of examine and document trends, not only in the coin charts, but also on social media, seeing how these two are kind of playing off one another, right? And the fourth step was really to organize this data. Once I found this data and I see these trends, how do I illustrate it in a way that kind of makes it digestible and visually pleasing, right? And the last step was to really analyze the trends. Now that I have these trends kind of laid out, visualize, what do they mean? Like, what is happening? How are these answering my research questions? So going into my actual findings and analysis, I found that the 24-hour volume highs of the coin was really the best metric to study and investigate when demonstrating the impact that influencers can have on a coin, right? I'll get into that, like why that is the case a little bit later. But if we look at the MILF token 24-hour volume chart to the left, we can kind of see on the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, volume is very stagnant, around 1 to 3 million. However, on the 26th, popular influencer Aiden Ross promotes the token on his Twitch live stream. And so you can see that kind of 534% increase in volume. And the following day, it still stays relatively high due to kind of Aiden tweeting out, I'm giving away 10,000 token. Right, if you kind of show that you have this token in your wallet and you're following the Twitter that they have, right? And so following this promotion kind of the day after, you see that volume drops back down 90% on the 28th to its original high, and kind of just stays there and has still stayed there to this day, right? And this similar trend is also shown in Bank Social, where you have, that initial launch, you're around 8 million. And then FaZe Banks, another popular influencer, tweets out that similar giveaway tweet to kind of draw traffic towards this coin. And then you see that increase in 69%. And then following the day of the promotion, you have that drop of 30%, right? And so I think it's pretty clear to see that influencers obviously have an immense impact on a project, on a cryptocurrency project. And many people think, the stigma is that, price matters when dumping a coin, or price matters when dumping a stock. But kind of like I said, in the cryptocurrency sphere, it's very different. In reality, volume is much more important, because, what I learned is prior to the involvement of an influencer, a lot of the initial investors involved, the deployers, the developers, they own a majority of the circulating supply. And in order to dump, there needs to be more buyers. And so knowing that, it's pretty clear to see kind of the role social media influencers now play in the grand scheme of things. They really aren't there to drive the price, but rather to kind of generate traffic and overall volume to aid in the manipulation of the market. Right. And so kind of some concluding thoughts. The goal of my research project is really to introduce and draw attention to this recent development. Like I said, if you looked at kind of the influencers involved, you see the scale that these schemes are operating on, and you compare that to the typical pump and dump, and you see it's just so much larger, this scale, right? And the people involved are so much more naive, because now you're marketing towards like a larger population, like kind of like a general population, that being kind of like little kids on Twitter, YouTube, that follow these influencers kind of blindly. And that's really what I wanted to kind of highlight within my overall research. But looking at future research options, I think continuing that exploration between the typical pump and dump and kind of the influencer back pump and dump would be really cool, just because I don't know. Personally, I think it's a development of this pump, of kind of like the standard one, but I think you can definitely make an argument that this is kind of its own independent case. And that kind of leads into the second point, is this an extension of the kind of 2021 pump and dump trend? We have GameStop, we have like an Elon Musk tweeting out, whatever. Is this just kind of that next thing? Or will we see this kind of progress further down the line to actually be a legitimate scam within the industry? And then last, how can the SEC regulate this? What is their response, right? I mean, obviously regulations aren't up to date. It's very hard to kind of keep up with the moving parts of the cryptocurrency industry, but what can they do to kind of respond and combat these influencers? But yeah, if there are any questions, I can take them now.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. It's a fascinating presentation about how people manipulate other people. From a social influencer's point of view, what is the motivation of this? Because you have followers who then realize they've been duped, so they don't trust you anymore. Or is it that they don't realize they've been duped? The reputational effect should be very negative.
Yeah, so this has been going on. So when I was doing my research for this, I realized that this has kind of been going on for a while, but on like kind of a much smaller scale. This recent, if I can go back, let me see. This coin Save the Kids, because of the amount of people involved, it's really put emphasis on, or a lot of these people have gotten in trouble, right? So their reputation has been in jeopardy, and they've had to come out and say, oh, I've done this. And because, or kind of let me rephrase this, right? The way, or I guess a lot of the people that do back these coins, they really don't have a clue what they're doing, right? They don't understand. It's the developers and kind of the deployers of the coin that are ultimately dumping. They just kind of are paying these people, paying these promoters to go about kind of promoting this coin, and the influencer sees, oh, hey, cryptocurrency, I can make money from this. I just have to send out a tweet and that's it. But they don't often realize that once they do send out that tweet, there's a lot of implications behind that. But the deployers and the developers of the coin do realize that. But another cool thing I think I'd also like to note is, like I said, with the Save the Kids token, a lot of these people have gotten in trouble. A lot of their reputations are kind of tarnished now. But what makes it really hard to kind of follow this or kind of see if these are like regular occurrences is, for a lot of these influencers, even though they're public, it's extremely hard to kind of like track down so kind of consistently doing this, or if it's a one-time offense. That's kind of all over the place, but hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your presentation. I had a question regarding, and this is more just your personal beliefs, not as much research. Do you think this is when you said SEC regulation, do you think this is free speech and them just taking advantage of their brand and they have a right to do this? Or do you think this is, when you're yelling fire on a stock, it's like yelling fire in a movie theater and it is something that shouldn't be protected by free speech?
I think with the following that these people have, I don't think it should fall under that, just because they understand just how impressionable their fans are, which is why they're doing this in the first place, right? If you're not going to you're not going to ask someone with 100 followers to promote a cryptocurrency, right? You're not going to get anything behind that. But these influencers know that they have this pull. They know what, I wouldn't say they know what they're doing, so to say, but they know that they're trying to draw people to this coin. So I would say yeah, it doesn't fall under that kind of like free speech, just because you know, the influence that they do have.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ronit. Up next, we have Graham Dilworth presenting about micro lending around the world and how it performs in economies of different levels of development. Take it away, Graham.
Hi, awesome, thank you. Let me get this up real quick. Okay, cool, here we go. So as previously stated, my presentation is about microlending around the world and how microloans perform in economies of different levels of development. So just to introduce myself first, my name is Graham Dilworth. I'm a rising junior at the University of Maryland. I'm studying public policy in Spanish, and I'm getting a master's of international development, which is why I chose this project largely. So before I really begin with my project, I think that it would be helpful to give some definitions, because a couple of terms that I'm using, a couple of ways I'm defining things are a little bit more niche. So first of all, what is a microloan? What is microlending? So at its core, microlending is giving out especially small loans to individuals and small businesses in order for them to either cover expenses or to form what's known as a micro business, an especially small business, in order to provide for themselves. This was initially popularized in the late 70s in Bangladesh, but it's now grown to be a nearly $50 billion industry global-wide or worldwide. And so my goal with this project, as I said earlier, was to compare how microloans perform in developing economies and as well as more developed economies. And so to compare, I wanted to find a way to easily define what each of these economies is. So what I ended up settling on was using the World Bank's manner of dividing economies. They actually, instead of dividing into just developed and developing economies, they divide into three groups. So the first type of economy that they talk about are developed economies. These are economies with really well-defined private sectors and relatively well-regulated ones with higher standards of living and higher costs of living. So they're exclusively found in North America and in Europe, with a couple exceptions in East Asia and in the Pacific. So the second group of economies that they talk about are what's known as an in-transition economy. So these are all actually post-Soviet states. They're economies that were relatively well built up during the Soviet era, and then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, were are now in the midst of their transition to a capitalist economy. And so as a result, they have a lot of signs of a developed nation, but normally they have lower standards of living and lower costs of living. And then the third group that they talk about are developing economies. So these are economies without a very well-defined private sector, without a large nationwide economy that all members of the country are a part of, like we have in the US. And so developing economies are actually where the vast majority of microloans are distributed, and where the vast majority of international development as a whole takes place. So going into this project, I knew I wanted to research microloaning, and that was pretty much about it. And so going into it, I ran into a couple roadblocks. One of them was that I didn't have the money to go to a developing nation or to go to another country to study firsthand the impacts of development. I didn't have, I wasn't the backing, I wasn't part of the World Bank, I wasn't part of the International Monetary Fund. I couldn't conduct research on their behalf or anything like that. And more than anything, I didn't have the time to conduct a real length-long experiment or research on the ground research, because microloans are something that, and international development as a whole, is something that takes months and years to have an actual effect. If I'd gone and tried to do something in about 6 weeks or about 2 months, it wouldn't have been actually reflective of the actual impacts of loans or anything like that. So then, to me, the solution became pretty clear. I was going to do a really big literature review and a comparative analysis between how different microloans perform from different groups. And so I got information from World Bank groups. I got information from the International Rescue Committee Center for Economic Empowerment. I got things from local banks in different economies that were publishing reports. I got reports from international NGOs who were publishing their reports on microloan performance. And as a result, I had a lot of data and none of it was directly comparable. There were things that were measured in loan default rates. There were things that were measured in like the levels of education among children of loan recipients. There were things that were measured as what percent of loan recipients think that they have enough to pay for their daily expenses. Every group did its own research. So I realized that I would have to take all of this quantitative research and use it to build qualitative analysis, picture and analysis of how these loans are performing in different economies. So as we talked about at the beginning of this whole symposium, I wanted to create something that was new. I didn't want to do research on anything that really existed before. And what I found was that there wasn't a real analysis of microloan performance between different types of economies. So that's where I ended up. And so with all that data gathering, I found that there were really three factors that contribute to a loan working or not, or a loan program working or not, depending on the economy. And those were actually, I analyzed about a half dozen specific economies with a lot more that I did general research on for my paper. But in this, I'm going to focus on the largest microlending economy for each specific group of economies. For example, to make that more easy to understand, I'm going to focus on India for developing economies because that's the largest microlending economy in a developing one. And so the first factor I found that really impacted how loans performed was actually the amount of regulation in areas. So India is the largest microloaning economy in the world. It's almost half almost half the value of microloans distributed worldwide are distributed in India. It's a $20 billion economy. And a lot of them are distributed in north central India to farmers. And initially this had really positive results. But as time went on, it became clear that a lot of farmers were going into debt and were actually running into a lot of problems. And what brought this to international attention was in the early 2010s, there's a string of suicides among Indian farmers. And there was a lot of research and reports done on this. And what became clear was that they were actually farmers who were thousands of dollars in debt to predatory microloaning organizations that weren't being well regulated. And as a result, they were actually trying, a lot of them were committing suicide in order to give their families life insurance payouts to cover the outstanding microloans. So the second factor that I found that prohibits microloan performance was the cost of starting up a business. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina has the highest amount of the largest amount of microloans distributed in a in transition economy. And microloans are actually very similar here to the microloans that are given out in developing economies. They average around $1,000, and overall they're very small. And there's a really interesting report by MIT's Poverty Action Lab that found that among loan recipients, while there were higher rates of business ownership, there were higher success rates for businesses, there were a lot of unintentional consequences. For example, families were actually less likely to have enough food on their table if they'd received a microloan and invested in a business, and their kids were less likely to get educated. And the results from that study and from a couple that followed it up found that in an economy like the Bosnian one, where the cost to start a business isn't just a few $100s or $1,000 like it is in many developing economies, microloans weren't large enough for loan recipients to actually start a business. They needed to cut back on their own spending or pull their kids out of school in order to pay for it. So this was actually having an unintended negative consequence on the quality of life of loan recipients. So the third factor that I found that prohibits microloan performance is a high cost of living in the economy. So in France, there's a very high, the cost of living is akin to many other developed economies. In France, the microloaning economy is the largest of any developed economy. It's split between almost 50 million, 500,000 loan recipients. That was very bad slip. But anyways, it's split between hundreds of thousands of loan recipients. It's a massive industry. But the French Financial Board found that only a third of loan recipients found that the micro businesses that they were starting could actually cover their expenses. They were actually able to live off of them. And many of them were still relying off of family members for help or were going into debt from their businesses. So 2/3 of loan recipients were entering programs that weren't actually successful. And the result, what they came to the conclusion of, is that the cost of living in France is just too high for a micro business to really work. You need to have an economy where the cost of living is really low, because otherwise just micro loans don't help you build up a big enough economy or a big enough business. So the big question from all of this is, can microloans actually work? And in my opinion, they can. And there was one specific economy that I found that was a prime example of this, and that was Indonesia. So in Indonesia, there's a very large microloaning industry, but it's run by one group. It's run by the government's government-owned bank. And in Indonesia, there's low rates of defaults, high rates of improvement of quality of life, and it's well regulated. It's a developing economy. There's a low startup cost for businesses, and people are actually able to live off of a micro business. So this is one of the few examples of economies that I found where they fit all three of those criteria and where they were really able to provide for their microloan recipients. So going forward, I think that it's really interesting to see what happens with microloaning, because in recent years, it's been expanding in developing economies and in transition economies. But we're starting to see a lot of the adverse and unintended consequences of it. So I think that research going forward really needs to focus on what percent of microloan recipients are actually better off, because the last thing that international development and economic development in general want to do is harm their loan recipients and make them worse off than they were originally. So from there, I'm going to just say, does anyone have any questions for me?
Thanks so much, Graham, for that amazing presentation. Question from me regarding potential correlation, if you noticed one, with war at the time. I'm thinking of a country like Bosnia, who's had ebbs and flows in terms of civil unrest. Did you notice anything outside of economics in terms of physical conflicts that might have had an effect, or did that not come across in any of the work you did?
Yeah, so a big thing that I actually ran into was after conflict. In the years and months after war, there's a big influx of microloaning and international development into these areas. For example, I think it was Kyrgyzstan, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union and a lot of internal turmoil, the World Bank marked it as a really place that they wanted a ton of investment in. So there was this massive influx of microlending organizations, and the result was the government wasn't strong enough at that point to regulate it well. And as happened in India, there's this big buildup of debt and of people who were getting taken advantage of. There were 100% interest rates and massive penalties when people missed their payments. So I think that something that I noticed was that these loans worked especially well in economies that had settled, had governments that were able to have a hold over the economic side of their country and were able to really regulate it.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Graham. Up next, we have Divya Kumar and Ajua Asian Davis talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll let the two of you take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adjoa Asian Davis.
And my name is Divya Kumar, and today we're here to present our research entitled Commitments to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Statements versus Action. So a quick statistic, while 85% of executive leaders believed that their organizations provide equitable opportunities for career development and promotions, only 18% of underrepresented employees actually agreed. So as we all know, in 2020, the revived Black Lives Matter movement prompted many Fortune 500 companies to voice their support for the movement, and they went on to emphasize their commitment to diversity and inclusion in the workforce. So this includes not only their hiring practices, but how employees of color are actually treated at work. So for a little bit of background, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits employers from discriminating against employees on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Yet 60 years later, underrepresentation remains a pretty big issue in the corporate world. So with our research, we sought to understand how well Fortune 500 companies promising statements during the BLM protests fared in comparison to their actual workplace environment employees of color face there. Top companies were really quick to claim that they were shifting more focus on diversity and inclusion post BLM, but as we all know, actions speak louder than words.
So for our research, we decided to conduct a survey in order to obtain data that allowed us to better understand how people of color are treated in the corporate environment. Since our research was focused on gathering people of color's opinions and feelings towards the way they are treated in their respective workplace, we asked questions that not only touched on how they personally felt towards their company's urge to increase diversity, but also how they viewed the representation of people in their workplace. In order to do this, we distributed surveys to people of color that work in Fortune 500 companies in order to gather their thoughts. So this roadmap below provides a guide on how our survey was set up. So we began by gathering baseline information, which included asking if employees from different ethnicities work in this company, to if the company is committed to increasing diversity and inclusion, and lastly, if the participant feels respected working for this company. We move on to the participants' comfort discussing their culture in the workplace. These questions asked whether participants felt comfortable discussing their background and culture with coworkers and their superiors. And this allowed us to see if participants felt safe and comfortable sharing their culture and personal beliefs with their colleagues. Next, we moved on to asking questions targeted towards seeing if participants feel as though their companies have made active initiatives to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within their workplace. In order to do so, they were asked to rate the degree of importance of diversity in the workplace to them, their direct manager, and senior leaders within their company. And this allowed us to compare how much diversity is a priority to the participant in comparison to how much they view diversity as a priority to their superior. We also included questions that asked if participants felt as though they were given equal career development opportunities. And this allowed us to see if participants felt overlooked or undervalued within their companies. Due to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement last year, we wanted to ensure that we asked a question that was specific to the movement in particular. We asked participants to rate the way they believed their company handled the Black Lives Matter movement from 1 to 5 stars, and if they believed it sparked little to no change, some change, or a lot of change. And the same question was also asked in regards to the Stop Asian Hate movement as well. Lastly, we provided one open-ended question for participants to express ways in which they believe that their company could have done better with addressing the movements and what change they would have liked to see implemented. All of these questions together helped us create a picture of how people of color feel working in corporate America in all aspects in order to make conclusions from the data.
So these figures display the results of important questions asked in the survey. It's important to note that the majority of respondents somewhat disagreed with the last bottom 3 questions, asking about equal opportunity, encouragement to apply for higher positions, and career development opportunities. These 2 graphs display how respondents rated their company's response to the Black Lives Matter movement and the Stop Asian Hate movement. It's clear that there's a pretty big disparity between the 2, with a combined 78% of respondents claiming BLM sparked some to a lot of change in their company, while an overwhelming 68% of respondents claimed the Stop Asian Hate movement sparked little to no change in their company. So when asked if employees of different backgrounds are treated fairly in their company, very few chose the strongly agree option. This reluctance to be confident in knowing if their company treats those from different backgrounds fairly is part of the problem. Most people selected options lower than strongly agree, indicating that there's a general consensus among the respondents that the fair treatment of all employees, regardless of background, is not a corporate normality. When asked if their company has equal career development opportunities for all employees, participants again had a consistent response in not selecting the agree options. This statement was actually one of the least agreed upon in the survey. The vast majority of respondents felt as though it's possible for employees to be treated unfairly due to their background and that career development opportunities aren't equally distributed in their companies. Yet when asked if their companies have policies against discrimination, an overwhelming majority agreed with that statement. So this leads us to believe that the anti-discrimination policies in place don't do enough when it comes to protecting and hiring employees of color in the workplace. Anti-discrimination policies can't solely aid a company in fostering a diverse workforce where employees of color feel respected and valued. Instead of only relying on anti-discrimination policies as like a safety net, it's imperative companies take the next step forward in enacting more meaningful policies that go beyond simply not tolerating discrimination and that actually alter the company's attitudes towards fairly treating all employees and giving them equal opportunities in the workplace, regardless of background. So many participants indicated that the Stop Asian Hate movement was barely addressed, if at all. And when asked to rate how their company handled the Stop Asian Hate movement out of 5, the average rating was a 2.81. The following question asks how much change the Stop Asian Hate movement sparked in their company, with 68% answering it sparked little to no change. When compared to the results of how companies responded to BLM, it was significant to see such a sharp contrast when another social movement emerged. So this made us wonder, like, did companies feel the need to address future highly publicized social movements now that they had spoken up during BLM? And was BLM only just like a check mark for large companies indicating that in the near future, they were clear for publicly supporting a social movement? The lack of consistent actions for the Stop Asian Hate movement made it seem like companies felt they no longer had the responsibility of speaking out against violence or about a major social movement unless it financially benefited them or ensured that they didn't lose a significant portion of their consumer base.
Large companies releasing press statements with inclusive language and big promises sound great until these said promises are found empty, according to their own employees. Josh Bersin conducted a study in order to determine what qualities are needed in order to run a successful company. At the bottom of this list included the necessary fundamental elements that are needed to run a company. Next was a skill in hiring the correct people that will be able to lead and manage a team. Near the top were learning leadership development and forming positive relationship with employees. But at the very top of the list that correlated with the highest positive impact on business performance was the importance of diversity and inclusion. The idea of diversity and inclusion being found to be one of the elements that can really make a company strive is odd to some, but it shows that the ability to attract and engage with people of all ages, cultures, and backgrounds is truly key to a business's success. The results of the survey succeeded in proving that companies' diversity statements and promises, often in wake of a social movement, must carry even more weight and authenticity to be able to make an actual difference in increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Companies should be sure to better align their public promises with effective action in the workplace that will allow people of color to feel safe, respected, and valued in the workforce. Further research could inquire about how intersectionality can play a role in corporate America and how that specification impacts diversity, equity, and inclusion directly. We want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Coomber for her continuous guidance and mentorship throughout this process of us completing our research, as well as Nima and Joanna for their support and encouragement. Are there any?
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It's great that you were able to collect data. I think that's quite impressive. What you found that more attention is paid to Black Lives Matter than to Stop Asian Hate in these companies seems to reflect US society in general, because BLM is a much bigger movement, and therefore I think companies are paying attention to it, whereas Stop Asian Hate just doesn't have the same cachet. Do you think these companies are reflecting society, or do you think there's something else going on?
I would say that they are reflecting society because with Black Lives Matter, I think it started in 2016, correct me if I'm wrong. So, and now we're in 2020 and when it really was able to grow. And I think because of quarantine and COVID, everyone was kind of forced to listen and pay attention to the movement. But with Stop Asian Hate, everything was kind of going back to normal in the world. So it wasn't as emphasized as Black Lives Matter was. So I feel like over time, sadly over time, it'll probably take more attention or more publicity for companies to really start taking initiative and making changes within their own company.
Yeah, just to
Thank
build off of that, we actually researched, like we looked into how companies responded during like the first Black Lives Matter movement, and then how they responded in 2020 when it became like a much more publicized movement with way more people like understanding what it was about. And companies seemed to respond much more when it looked like their consumer base was in trouble if they didn't speak out about it. So I think you are right in saying that it does reflect how much society seems to care about a movement, and that's how much that's like, it's gonna be proportional to how they discuss it and how they present themselves to support it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also have a question. Great presentation, guys. Yeah, one thing I want to say is that it was pretty interesting to see the difference between the Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate movements responses. And I was wondering if you noticed a correlation or a possible correlation with the company's workplace ethnicity makeup, and then maybe some of the employee responses to the respective movements.
I would say one company that we got a lot of responses from was Accenture, and they made a lot of their employees rated their company's response to the Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate movement much higher in comparison to other companies. So I think Accenture for sure is one company that truly like made statements and actually acted on those statements.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, team. Appreciate your amazing research. Up next, we have Spencer Wang talking about gender inequality factors in the workplace.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Spencer. A little bit introduction of myself. I am a public policy major, and I am a rising senior. And today I'll be introducing to you my project regarding gender inequality factors in the workplace and methods, strategies used to address them. So the agenda of my presentation, first I'll go into the introduction of the issue, and I'll go to the methodology about the research method that I used, and then I'll come to findings, analysis, and last but not least, the conclusion with my full report attached. And then there's a Q&A section for you guys to ask questions about this. Starting off with a quote from Michelle Obama, "No country can never truly flourish if it stifles the potential of women and deprives itself of the contribution of half of its citizens." We can see the importance of gender equity. With the UN's definition of gender equity is a fundamental human right. It's necessary for a foundation. It's a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. And the reason why I chose gender inequality in the workplace is because that gender inequality in the workplace fits into a bigger problem, which is gender inequality in general. So there are many factors of gender inequality in general, which includes education access, law protection of women that are lacked. So a couple of main factors of gender inequality in the workplace include the wage gap and biased mindsets towards women. There are enormous methods applied to address this problem, and I'll be discussing how HR management professionals used to address these issues. So my research questions include the commonly used methods by HR management professionals to address the problem, their key design factors, and how they evaluate the effectiveness of these methods, as well as the challenges they encounter while addressing these problems. So the main method I used for my project is a literature review as well as interview. For the exploratory purpose of this project, I settled my interviews in a semi-structured format in order for the HR professionals to talk about their experiences and what they encounter. So my literature review provided a background, which includes 2 studies analyzed different training programs and 2 research and case studies mentioned inclusive recruiting. On top of the background, I designed my interview to gather real-life insights from the HR professionals. I recruited my participant in the form that they all have 2 years and more experience, so that they have more experience in their work to talk about the issue and the experience they had. And my interview formats are all using video conference apps, and I analyze the data gathered and highlight those experiences related to my study. There is some limitation to this methodology since a small participant number does not make the results general enough, but it does allow a deeper understanding of their real life experiences of HR professionals. For the results, I found from the review of literature that the most common used aspects that are approached to the problem include employee mindsets and employment equality. This fits my anticipated results since the HRs can address these 2 aspects of gender inequality within their reach. The methods of HR professionals that they used to address gender inequality in the workplace include employee training through workshops, and their design factors include under these workshops is reflect, learn, apply, discuss model, which enables the participants of the workshops to really gain understanding of the problem and improve the environment. So the inclusive recruitment is actually related to employee training, since HR training is an important aspect in inclusive recruitment. So design factors of inclusive recruitment are targeting different stages of recruitment strategies. The evaluating factors of these methods have been long practice, including instant and long-term results. Instant evaluating factors include the rating of participants from the workshops, and long-term results including the actual increasing diversity levels. So from HR perspective, in which I included all the interview material, my participant illustrate the method that she used in real life, which includes mentoring and networking, which mentoring fits into the employee training, and networking fits in the inclusive recruitment. And that shows a connection with my literature review. She also mentioned the challenge that she encountered while addressing gender inequality in the workplace, which is it is hard to change the mindsets of hiring managers. So here's the conclusion. In the approach mostly taken by HR professionals are biased. And then HR professionals used mainly workshops and inclusive recruitment to address as the method to address gender inequality in the workplace. The evaluation factors they use include employees' approval, which is the ratings they gave to the workshops they attained. And second, employees' willingness to apply the knowledge, and then change in statistics of diversity level. And I would like to give a disclaimer because interview process, reaching out to people takes more time than expected. So the findings section, the HR perspective in findings section only include one participant in experience. And then if you're interested in seeing my full report, please scan this QR code. I'll give you 5 seconds, and then I'll move on to the Q&A section. Okay, so do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, great presentation, Spencer. Just one question I had was, I'm not sure if this was disclosed, but I was wondering what the one company was and what are some of the, I guess, overall findings that you maybe found surprising from your research.
I actually anticipated with my common sense, so nothing's really surprising me, but I'm not sure what the company you're asking. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I was wondering with your data collection, if you could disclose maybe the company if you were able to.
Oh no, I didn't include any specific company since this research is it's hard to find participants, and the materials are very limited when I was doing my research. Few articles addressed gender inequality in the workplace, studied by companies. So I included my material includes some in universities and some from Deloitte. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Spencer. Up next, we have a presentation from Casey Ho on the synthesis of research on the sustainability and safety of autonomous vehicles.
I can't share my screen yet.
Spencer, if you could remove screen sharing, please.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to do it.
I think I can override. You should have it now, Casey.
Does everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay. So hi everyone, my name is
Casey, sorry. For some reason, we're not able to see your screen. Okay, it works now.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Casey. I'm a rising junior studying information science and operation management business analytics, and I did my research on sustainability and safety of autonomous vehicles. This is my agenda. First, I'll talk about what's inspired me to start the research paper, and then the methodology on like specifically the literature review, and then my results and analysis based on case studies and what research gaps that I noticed. And then conclusion, I will summarize everything and future research. Okay, so the problem stemmed from pollution from greenhouse gases emissions, which lead to global warming. And as you can see on the right, it shows a graph on how transportation takes up 28% of greenhouse gas emission in the United States. The 72% of other sectors are from industries of electric, power industry, agriculture, commercial, and residential. And of the 28%, 83.1% of the transportation greenhouse gas emissions were from on-road vehicles, which suggests that cars do take up a lot of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And some motives that could help like reduce these greenhouse gas emissions could be from electric vehicles and recycling like lithium batteries for them. There are a lot of like technology evolving and the rise of autonomous vehicles, along with increase in drivers each year. Some other countries that are also studying this are the United Kingdom and Australia. And the methodology I took for this research project was literature review, specifically in cities, and then recycling, repurposing, and safety of autonomous vehicles, because I thought that there was a lot of articles and case studies that were done previously on it, and it would be like the most optimal to consolidate all the other researchers' findings. So I focused it on using quantitative data to justify my findings. So on the right, the graph suggests that 14% uses rideshare while 76% drives alone to work. And on the bottom, you can see transportation demographics of how many people are in the US in the last year, and then who are licensed, and the statistics of crashing each year. This suggests that it's like more focused on comparing the number of people who are able to drive to the mode of transportation commonly used to the workplace, and considers how sustainability and safety are correlated to vehicles, specifically autonomous vehicles. My results, so for each objectives, or like I did a case study for each, or found a case study for each. So the first one was the Dublin, Ireland case study, which focused on creating a smart mobility solution for Dublin. And so for them, they concluded that increase in like rideshare and carpooling with like autonomous vehicles is a potential proponent to urban sustainability, to not only decrease traffic, but also pollution, and potential sustainability implications of autonomous for benefits to a city. In relation to our DC metro area, Dublin has about 0.74 million more inhabitants than we do. So I believe that this would be like, it's like replicable for us. And this leads to recycling and repurposing materials, specifically lithium ion batteries and electric vehicles. So batteries derive from cobalt and lithium, which means countries have to depend on different main sourcing countries for these raw materials. For example, for lithium, countries depend on Chile 78%, and while 91% of countries depend on Russia for cobalt. And so to prevent waste from occurring, like just throwing out batteries, we could reuse them, because right now these recycling batteries are negligible because there are safety concerns over mishandling and like using them as they are combustible. This leads to the safety of autonomous vehicles. As compared to autonomous vehicles and human-driven vehicles, encountering intersections from the Melbourne, Australia case study, it justified that autonomous vehicles had more precise grasp of desired speed distribution in comparison to human-driven cars. So that represents how autonomous vehicles are more precise and would decrease the crash rate, which was also studied in the Colorado and Paddock study, which so they tested 3 different severities of crashes, and it proved that autonomous vehicles reduce the crash rate by at least 50% of the number of crashes per million miles driven, due to how autonomous vehicles have like sensors and radars to detect, while humans would have to like turn their head or like look at mirrors, which are more like room for error. Some research gaps that I noticed were sustainability and safety of autonomous vehicles have had a lot of research done over the past 4 years justifies their existence and advancing technologies. However, there could be more research done on whether or not manufacturing plays a role in sustainability, like using recycled materials, and how it would impact the safety of the vehicle, such as how, as I previously mentioned, there are like cons to using batteries as they are combustible. And so with further studies, it could show whether or not it would guarantee quality, even if you recycle the batteries to use it. In conclusion, autonomous vehicles can gauge a safe alternative to saving the environment while ensuring the safety of passengers. My findings would help our planet be more sustainable and resolve some safety concerns over autonomous vehicles. And this would be using like repurposed and recycling would greatly cut waste and preserve resources. And as I mentioned, further research could be the capabilities of repurposed recycled materials in vehicles and their impact on longevity of a vehicle along with reliability. I believe understanding how recycled and repurposed batteries would help gauge the full sustainability of electric autonomous vehicles from the day a vehicle starts coming together in pieces to when it's being used by humans. Okay, thank you. A huge thanks to Mark for being an amazing, incredible mentor to me and helping me every step of the way of my research journey. I could not have done it without everyone here. So thank you everyone for taking your time every day to listen to my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Casey. Question from me. If you were going to redo this process and start from scratch with the knowledge you know now, how would you have approached it differently? Or would you do it the same way, and you think?
I think if I had like more resources, I could do like actual testing on it. I think that would be a different approach, but with the same resources, I'd probably still go with like a literature review and looking at other case studies.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Could I just ask, what other case studies did you consider but not include? I'm just curious. Sometimes it's interesting to think about the kind of path not taken. So you like chose Dublin or Melbourne, or what were some kind of, were there kind of other cities or other regions that you considered but didn't include for whatever, and what was your thinking behind that?
I considered, oh no, I didn't consider. I saw another case study on Singapore. I didn't really consider it, as I thought Dublin in size was like more similar to like the DC metro area rather than Singapore. So I thought it could be like more applicable rather than such a smaller or bigger city.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, that's an important consideration.
Thanks so much, Casey. All right, we're going to be taking a 3-minute break until 6:24. So everyone feel free to take a bio break, do what you need to do, and we'll restart our presentations at 6:24. Welcome back, everyone, and we are excited to continue tonight's session. We have 4 more fantastic presentations left, and our next one is going to be by Roshini, discussing and exploring the current value of ESG metrics. Roshini, you can take it away now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Roshni Parameshwaran. Thank you, Nima, for the introduction. I'd just like to start off by saying that I'm a rising sophomore studying finance, and today I'm sharing with you my work from this past summer, which is exploring the current value of ESG metrics in the investing community, a comprehensive review. So for today's agenda, first, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on what ESG metrics are, and then discuss some of my research goals for this project, the methodology I used, some of the findings I came up with, some of the limitations in my study, wrap everything up with the conclusion, and then of course, we will have time for some questions if needed. So first, I'd like to discuss what ESG metrics are and how they're relevant in the business world right now. So ESG metrics, known as environmental social governance metrics, are standards primarily focused on sustainability to which companies are held. And these ESG ratings and metrics are an increasingly important standard in the investing community, especially among those who prioritize sustainability and pro-environmental values. And this group of people and this community is known as the socially responsible investing, or SRI community. On top of this, ESG has had a recently relative rise in popularity, really gaining traction in the early 2000s. And because of this, I noticed that there is a large gap in literature, but because of the growing relevance of the standards and the metrics, there really is an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of the metrics and really their relevance in the investing community. So my overarching goal for the project was to contribute to the field by summarizing the existing literature and kind of creating an agenda for future research and really identifying what the gaps are and how they can be filled. So the first goal that I really wanted to focus on was understanding how a company's ESG ratings were related to the company's market value, where market value is really an indicator of a company's financial success. On top of this, after looking at research goal 1, I also wanted to focus on how a company's rating also related to their environmental impact. Finally, with the time I had left, I also wanted to highlight some of the shortcomings of ESG metrics because, again, they are relatively new, and I think it's important that we highlight where improvements can be made in this metrics, especially so that investors can be aware. So the methodology that I used for my presentation, or for my project, was a literature review. I decided to select reliable sources from a variety of databases, primarily from Google Scholar and UMD's various library databases, and then organize them based on their perspective. So for example, on the right side here, I have a diagram that regards research goal 1. Here, I wanted to identify the correlation between a company's ESG rating and a company's market value. So I determined that there are 3 possible correlations: a positive, negative, or neutral correlation, with the positive correlation meaning that companies with higher ESG ratings had higher market value, negative meaning that higher ESG ratings meant lower market value for a company, and neutral meaning that these 2 variables were not affecting one another. So once I would pick a source, read through it, select the viable information that I needed, whether it be qualitative or quantitative data, I would categorize this information into a chart such as what we see on the right-hand side. So now I'd like to talk about my findings for each of these 3 goals, with my first goal again being looking at a company's ESG rating versus their market value. From the existing literature, I found that there are 3 possible correlations, again, listed in the previous slide as well. These correlations include a positive, negative, or a neutral correlation. From this research, I found that there is no definitive correlation between these 2 variables. But the reason why it's important to kind of know this at the time is that this disparity in results really makes it difficult for investors to kind of use ESG metrics when developing their portfolios because they're not sure what the financial outcome is going to be. And so I think that it's really important that in the future, more markets need to be researched by region. So what I mean by this is, for this research, I decided to look at some Latin markets, European markets, American markets. So other markets also need to be researched. And I think that they need to be researched during various time periods. So for this specific project, I looked at market conditions during COVID and prior to COVID. And so I think another time period that would be interesting to look at is post-COVID, how that affects our market as well. And so I think that, again, there's still not a definitive correlation. And I think that it's important that we eventually develop one in order to make ESG ratings really valuable for investors. The second goal that I wanted to look at was, again, looking at a company's ESG ratings versus their environmental impact. Now, because ESG ratings have really only gained relevance quite recently, there's very minimal existing research, especially when regarding environmental impact specifically. Compared to goal 1, there's much less research that really discussed goal 2. And because of this, I had to take a broader look at corporate social responsibility rather than ESG ratings specifically. So what I did find in research is that companies with higher corporate social responsibility did have higher ESG ratings as well. So I thought that looking at CSR rather than ESG would be acceptable. From research, I was able to find that companies with higher CSR also had a positive environmental impact, typically improving their company's carbon footprint and having better social welfare programs. However, in regards to goal 2, in order to really discuss ESG ratings specifically, we need more company transparency to really make more definitive conclusions regarding these 2 variables. So this requires companies to give more information regarding their behaviors and regarding their environmental reports. Finally, we'll take a look at goal 3, and these are some of the shortcomings of ESG metrics. The largest shortcoming that I found in ESG metrics currently is the lack of standardization among ESG raters. And this is extremely relevant because this leads to score inconsistency, meaning that different raters will rate companies at various levels. And this can be problematic for investors because they're not sure if this company really should be rated as an A-level company or a C-level company. And so at this point, it falls in the hands of the investor to conduct their own external research into how raters are grading these companies to understand which raters have rubrics that follow their own personal values. And I think that having a more standardized system can make this process more effective and efficient for the investors, again, making the ESG metrics more valuable as a whole. Now, even though I did have the opportunity to look at several goals during my project, I think there are some limitations that need to be addressed. First of which being the breadth of information which I was able to access. I did only use Google Scholar and a variety of UMD's libraries to access the articles for this project. I think that being able to access more information could have provided me with more data, again, maybe helping me make a more definitive conclusion. Again, I only looked at articles that were in English, again, decreasing the total number of available information. And then another thing which I found to be pretty ironic is that some of the data from the various articles was provided by various raters, the ESG data that was provided. And this could have affected the data or that they were putting out as a result, which could have affected my literature review and the conclusions that I was able to make. So really based on the conclusions that I was able to make on all 3 goals, the overarching conclusion is that more research in the field is extremely necessary, especially when you look at goals 1 and 2, there aren't any strong correlations or strong conclusions that can be made. And the only way to mediate or to help that is by conducting more research. And I think that what's really important here is we conduct research in various markets and in a variety of conditions to kind of get the full scope of everything that could possibly be happening. And again, I think that in order to really make ESG metrics the most valuable they can for investors, it's really important that we have a strong correlation between the ratings that are being provided and a company's market value, because that's really the only way investors can confidently create their portfolios using ESG metrics. And I think that's what would really increase the value of ESG as a whole. I'd like to first of all say thank you to my mentor, Dr. Michael Gerst, for all of his support during this process. I'd also like to say thank you to Nima and Joanna for all of their help as well. I couldn't have done it without everyone. And again, thank you to the audience for your time. And if you have any questions at this time, please let me know.
I did have a question. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about the different raters. You were saying there were different ones, and I was wondering if there is anything to like qualify somebody to be a rater and like what they have to do to give the rating. Just if you could explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I didn't really look into what qualifies as certain like rating company to give out ratings, but I do know that there are some specific rating companies that are very commonly used. So there's like the very popular ones, and then there's also the other ones that just, you know, provide scores but aren't used as often. I know that one of the most common ones that I saw during my work was Bloomberg, and yeah, on top of that, there are other ones as well. But yeah, I don't have a lot of information about that, but that's something I can definitely get back to you on.
Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned that the results were inconclusive based off the ESG metrics that you had, but you say that there were multiple different metrics. How did you figure out it was inclusive? Did you average different scores? Did you pick a specific provider, or what made goal 1 and 2 versus goal 3 occur, if that makes sense?
So really what I noticed in specifically when looking at goal 1 is that there was a lot of data that was conflicting with each other. And so what I mean by that is specifically looking at the European market, there were 2 different studies, one of which said that there's a positive correlation between the 2 variables and one that said there was a negative correlation. And so I think that potentially this disagreement could have been because they used different raters, or it was done during a different time period, or you know, they were looking at specific pieces of the ESG metrics, specific parts of what they were using to grade. And so I think that without having some standardization, it's just overall going to be kind of difficult to come up with a specific correlation. So kind of to concisely answer that, without fixing problem 3 first, I don't think that 1 and 2 can have like a concise correlation, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. And up next, we have Hannah Scott presenting on packaging and if sustainability is profitable.
Thank you, Nima, for the introduction. My name is Hannah Scott. I'm a rising junior at the Smith School. I'm studying accounting and business management. And this summer, I researched packaging, and more specifically, if packaging can be profitable for companies to be more sustainable. So first, why is sustainability needed in the packaging industry? And that's because of the large waste problem that our world is facing. To the left, you see a bunch of different numbers, but essentially we have a major waste problem on our hands, and it's only growing as our population continues to exponentially grow. And it's expected that in the year 2050, there will be 3.4 billion tons of waste produced annually. And this is just not something that our world can sustain, and we clearly need to make a change. And this, relating to packaging makes up nearly 50% of our total waste. And a very small percentage of this packaging waste is collected to be recycled. And then out of that percentage that's collected, even less is actually recycled. And then I'm going to take a look at the SunChips case study. So when I was doing my literature review and research, I came upon the Sunchips case study, and it really was what inspired me to do the research in general. So Frito-Lay in 2010 released a fully compostable chip bag for the Sunchips brand, and it actually wasn't as positive as everybody would think. Prior to releasing the bag, of course, they did lots of research, and it showed that consumers wanted this. They wanted to support sustainable, but because the compostable bag is a different makeup than like a traditional plastic bag, it's more rigid, and because of this was significantly noisier. And consumers, even though it was more sustainable, weren't comfortable with this change, and just weren't comfortable with the packaging and didn't like it as much as the normal one. And it actually led to a drop in sales by 11%. And the company ended up pulling the bag and going back to normal packaging. So this is what led me to want to pursue this research project. And for my methodology, I went to look for qualitative data through conversational interviews with different snack companies and packaging producers, and did a series of secondary research to find more information. Some limitations and challenges that I ran into was the time limit that we had in the 10 weeks. It was difficult to get in contact with people and just find everything out that I wanted to learn. It was really difficult to get in contact with people in general, but once I was able to find one person, it made everything much smoother. And then, of course, during my conversations, I have to assume that the person I'm talking to is fully knowledgeable and that I can take their word as fact. Okay, so this is, of course, all the companies I spoke to. I had them be anonymous just so everybody would be comfortable to speak with me. And these are just a brief overview of the companies I spoke with. So the first company I spoke with was a produce wholesaler. So of course, packaging is going to be different for them. It's not like they're selling to an everyday consumer in the grocery store, but they're selling more to the big company that will then take that material and sell it to an individual. So for them, their number one concern isn't really graphics or anything like that, but health and safety. So one of packaging's main purposes is to keep contaminants out and keep the food fresh. So that is their number one concern. And then that kind of ties into the second takeaway, which is reusing material, because they're going to be using more industrial packaging to send produce to their customers. There is the possibility to reuse materials, but then it possibly conflicts with safety and health, where say you send something to one company and get that item back, it could be contaminated with different things that could lead them to be liable in the future. And they also have to think about the different costs that would go into getting the material back and reusing it. And is it truly profitable to be sustainable in this sense if you're spending the money on all these different things? And then something else important to think about is the functionality of the material. So different products have different oxygen transfer rates, meaning that it has to keep a certain amount of oxygen in and let oxygen out. For example, to the left, you see apples packaged, but say they're not packaging apples, they're packaging broccoli. That's going to need a different transfer rate. And as of right now, the plastic packaging is doing the job that it's supposed to for this company. So why would they want to change if what is going on right now is working for them? And then moving on to company two, it was a major snack and beverage company. And one of the major takeaways from my conversation with this lady was that the current recycling system has to change in order for recycled material to be profitable to use. As of right now, using virgin plastic is actually cheaper than using recycled material, because the recycled material, we don't have enough high quality recycled plastic in the United States in order for them to be able to use that. So we need to have a change in our recycling system in order to have that be profitable. And for this company, kind of different from the first one, they are selling directly to consumers. So like consumer habits are really important for the packaging trends. We discussed like how using plastic bottles is important because customers like to be able to reseal it and things like that, even though plastic isn't as widely recycled as aluminum. That's something that they have to take into account. to support consumer habits. And then this company is actually rolling out a compostable packaging line for one of their snacks. And one of the main takeaways from this was that the technology is being widely shared amongst different snack companies. It's not something that one group wants to keep for themselves to profit them, but they want it to be shared widely because they think it's so important for everybody to use. And then company 3, I actually got a lot of different information regarding packaging. So at the bottom, you see these different pictures of these, the traditional snack bag that you would feel. It's that plastic film bag. And what I didn't realize is that they are actually composed of all these different layers. This to the right, you see the graphic having 6 different layers. They're all made of different material, and it actually, like, each layer has a different purpose. And because of this like intricate film bag, it's not compostable. And this is kind of a challenge that these snack companies are running into. During our conversation, she mentioned the possibility for using one layer that would be able to function the same, but it's just something that needs to be further developed. And then for this company, they are very much an old school snack company. So if they're going to make a change, it's going to be profit driven. And they were very successful in decreasing the material used while still being functional. And it gave them lots of different profitable benefits. So using corrugated boxes, they had at first very thick boxes and were able to decrease the thickness of the box. As you can see through this diagram, you can be thicker or thinner and have it still be functional. So this saves them material that they have to purchase, saves them space, weight, and everything in transportation. And the same thing goes for this diagram to the right. This is a plastic barrel that they use in packaging. It has these different indents in it that makes it so they use less material. And it actually strengthens the structure, the way they design the indents. So they're using less material and having a higher functioning product. And then company 4 is a compostable packaging producer. So this is the opposite spectrum. They're the ones making the packaging. And the takeaways from this conversation was that there has been a larger shift to compostable packaging in 2018 when China stopped accepting and purchasing plastics from other countries. So these countries that were the ones selling their materials then had nowhere to sell their items unless they sold somewhere else, which hopefully they don't, and instead are the ones that think more about what they're doing and come up with different ways to make a change. One of the problems or difficult challenges that this group was working with is the price difference. Of course, compostable material requires a lot of different things going into it that plastic doesn't, making the price higher. And in the food industry, of course, price sensitivity is greater than, say, a different industry. So the price markup is something that snack companies really take into account, and it might be holding them back from switching to compostable. And for this compostable packaging to be effective and work, it needs to go to an industrial composting facility, which we don't have as many as we'd need for this to be effective. And it's also something people don't really understand when they hear compostable. They think you can throw it outside and it'll biodegrade on its own, which isn't the case. So during our conversation, it was highlighted that we need to have infrastructure changes to make this practical. So just kind of like concluding implications, health and safety is really the most important functions. Reducing materials is really the most effective way to save money on a variety of different costs. And then switching materials to, say, compostable or recyclable is something that is positive sustainably, but we need to have some different infrastructure changes to make it more practical and profitable. I just want to have some acknowledgements. Thank you so much to my advisor, Professor Evers, for all his help and guidance through this whole process. And thank you to the Center for Social Value Creation staff and faculty for all the different workshops and help through the process. Okay, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask away.
So do you think there's hope in the future for recyclable materials?
I would say definitely yes, because something that was consistent amongst all my conversations is that this is something that people are working on a lot. Packaging engineers are really trying to find different ways to make it practical and profitable to have that sustainable switch. And I think in the coming years, it's going to be more common.
A question regarding so you had four very different organizations that you spoke to. Do you think, and I don't want it to be where you're giving away anything, do you think these four were anomalies on either, for lack of a better term, the more sustainable or less sustainable side of the scale? Or do you think they were pretty standard relative to their industry and indicative of the rest of the industry?
I would say I could go back to kind of like describing them a little bit, the chart, but I would say they are more standard companies. Like I was talking about the one company that was decreasing material. I would say being more old school profit driven is typically what we see. And all the companies, I would say none of them are specifically those green companies that is their main goal. They aren't really social ventures that's their goal and they just happen to make the product. It is a profit driven company that's making the change to be profitable. That was generally the group.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Hannah.
Thank you for the question.
Up next, we have Red on the effects of autonomous airborne vehicles on soiling maintenance for solar farms.
Thank you. Am I coming off okay?
Hello? You are. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see your screen.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, just an issue here. Okay, so fix this up. So this is the effects of autonomous airborne vehicles on solar farm soiling maintenance. So the brief overview involves the increasing growth within sustainable energy industries. It's not what it once was. There's many innovations in both the methodology and the just a gradual spread of like land and output. So problems that were once seemed negligible to industries like solar or wind, such as soiling, didn't seem as big because they would only cut out a chunk of energy, like 1% or fraction of a percentage. But as it grows, and as we see here, soiling has become somewhat of a larger issue. The intention of this presentation is to demonstrate how big that issue is, and how we can use autonomous vehicles and robotics to basically mend and sort of lessen the issues, as well as like make maintenance seem more effective. So in general, let's just shed light on this, reveal the theoretical solutions and solution history. As it says, I'm going to demonstrate where I sampled my sample plants from, my sample parts, and my statistics from. Then I'm going to analyze how effective they are from a cost perspective and a power perspective. And then I'm going to, from a more qualitative perspective, show how effective this method would really be in, modern scenarios. So as mentioned, soiling has become some bit of an issue within the PV industry. Aside from other sources like nuclear and aside from obvious fossil fuels, the growth in solar cells, PV cells, solar energy as a whole has been the largest out of the sustainable sources, with over 114 billion going to the planets. This was a 2016 stat, and obviously since then it's been growing. Soiling losses, it says it has such a wide margin, 5 to 50% annually, if gone unchecked, due to the fact that well, biomes have very different compositions, densities, and other factors that play into soiling. Some places may have organic soiling, such as residual like plants, agricultural dust and such, while deserts will obviously have more mineralistic types and like, or even some areas would have, urban areas would have carbon-based dust. So far, we have a pretty effective means of handling soiling. We use manual maintenance, which is simple and easy, and that's why most methods weren't really played into use before, as it would just be as simple as every now and then going down, looking to see how, looking at each individual panel or individual section of panels with a team and just determining whether it needs to be wiped out every so often. The method that I propose for this search would be the use of autonomous airborne vehicles, such as the one shown, where they can perform regular maintenance checks and cleans using various forms of AI, as well as like common solutions already used within the industry. It was originally, this method wasn't considered due to the fact that in the early stages of autonomous vehicles, they were deemed too costly and they weren't advanced enough to handle such tasks. They were normally used to just scare off birds, or maybe just occasionally search around for damage or unauthorized personnel on the fields. Various forms of hardware and software had been developed for specifically these purposes and can now perform much more effectively. One such is the GI2, I believe, which is the octocopter I featured over there in the top, the very top picture, which has much larger capacity, 8 motors, and can handle large arrays of panels easily, as it's already used in agricultural farming to handle hundreds of acres. Oops, sorry. So the methodology was a tad bit tedious for me, but it was essentially I would use a sample of 5 plants around the world, and these 5 plants would sort of act as the sample of effectiveness for autonomous vehicles. They would come from different areas. They would have different compositions of soil, different densities of soiling, but also they would come from very different biomes and very different governments. It may not be as clear on this display, but maintenance frequency was a big thing, where some areas would have once a year, they would check for soiling. So it could leave a huge buildup per year, while other areas would have 2, 3, 4, 5. And even though, despite the fact that the US government recommends that we check our plants almost on a weekly basis, but due to the high price and maintenance, whether manual or not, it does pose a point or a limitation in how often we can check. So I would start off with the 5 plants and account for each one of their variables. The 3 control variables I was using for this presentation or this paper were the soiling composition, density, and the area of effect, which is basically what kind of soil would that be, whether it is limestone, granite, I believe. Sometimes I would check for like carbon-based soils. The second one was density, because layering had a larger effect. Layering as well as like surface area, but I didn't find enough data on surface area. And the area of effect was a large factor, as well as, since one of the factors in effectiveness is cost effectiveness, and that was one of the larger limitations at the time, it's pretty important to see which kinds of plants are like, what size of plants are most effective, as a drone in itself, especially an octocopter, is quite expensive. That's like over 10 to 15,000 plus training and such. And if a single team can cover 100 acres on their own easily, then the price may have might be a vast difference in annual cost. So after finding those factors, after after locating which plants I would use, the factors that I would use, I also put together which forms of hardware and software would act as my control variable for the drone maintenance. This was relatively easy, as I could use software that was already in development on Cutting Edge and actually used in something called renewable drone programs. These drones were similar to the ones I've shown, octocopters. They were used for usually agriculture as well as offshore wind turbines, other PV cells, and other forms of maintenance. So they were already performing similar tasks. I won't get into every single spec, but the important ones for this study were the software that I used, as well as the body type and the solution that was used for the experiment. I'd chosen a MATLAB software, which had a 96% effectiveness. It fit every requirement as far as drones go, because most of them would require being on the ground or being connected directly via the circuit networks with the solar panels. So this one could easily, it was very flexible as far as which camera angles could recognize dust buildup and such. In addition, I chose a basic ionic solution rather than water to clean off the dust, as it had been 96% effective. With each factor, I would just map out the effectiveness of the solution as well as the drone versus the energy lost on the plant size, the soil composition, and the soil density. This was taken off of sources that would map out, well, how much power was lost percentage-wise annually on dust density and dust composition. I factored it and I multiplied it by the cleaning constant. The cleaning constant, which was the percentage of effectiveness in the drone finding and cleaning the panel. And I would interpolate it here. This was red soil, which was a type of soil that I mapped out. This would be used, and I would interpolate the point, and I would basically map it onto one of the 5 plants. After that, these 3, for each one of these interpolated points, I would find one of the points for density, area, and composition. And I would find the average. That would be the average effectiveness of the method. And then I would map it side by side with the maintenance cost of a plant that size. And thus I would analyze how effective the method would be as a whole. So after that long methodology, essentially I found that the cleaning constant was about 95%, as the percentage for finding soiling was really high. It was at around 95-96%, and as well as the percentage for cleaning, as far as the solution effectiveness, was also 95. I found that on average for each one of the 3 plant variables, I found 97-98% power restoration. This is based off of the basis. This is off the basis that there had been no maintenance prior, or no maintenance for that year except for drone maintenance. So 97-98% of the power restored after treating soiling using these methods on a constant basis. I did find that the cost effectiveness for plant D, which was the smallest plant size, had been a lot smaller than a lot less than I estimated. The smaller plants seem to need this method a lot less, as I mentioned earlier. They had, if you have a team to really handle the plant, then it would be cheaper just to use manual treatment, manual cleaning, rather than drones and constant checking. It would just be more efficient. this was based off of a constant I found online, as it was $25,000 per year for a 100 gigawatt plant. And I was map that out to the size of each one of the respective plants. And I factored in the cost for the drone effectiveness based off of the price per part as well as price per maintenance. I did find for plant C, plant C, that since that plant was in a desert, it had the most effectiveness, as well, dust buildup from sand and minerals were much more prevalent, resulting in a 49% loss, 49% loss initially. And so it restored the most power relative to what it had lost, being at, let me see, 1.6 gigawatt. Oh, wait, sorry. It was plant B, and it was around 750 gigawatts. And I put the amount of households that this power restoration would save, sometimes being over 70 million to 172 million. So overall, it seemed quite effective. Overall, I would say that this method was a lot more effective than I had initially thought. Most people, most companies back in the recent decade believed that drones weren't really a capable method, as it was costly. That was the big aspect. And obviously AI probably wasn't as advanced as it had been today. But given the data that I found, as well as the high cleaning statistics that I looked online, it was surprisingly high, and the cost was relatively proportional. I'd been working under the basis that I was, as far as cost efficiency, that I was working with the parts that were most effective rather than cost efficient. So that would be one factor that could play in later, because more companies could opt in for less motors, or smaller range, or less solution, or maybe just less check-ins, and that would definitely play a larger role. This data, what I had found here was basically I used the sources that were already provided, as far as the effects of soiling, as well as renewable drone sources, and I combined them to find the theoretical effectiveness of drone maintenance in this day and age, as previous sources had never really tested out the overall effectiveness on a case-by-case study, or rather they just brushed them off as being not effective enough, or just not practical enough. So I feel with this data, we can move on and advance into the specific cases. This data was majority theoretical, and it worked off of many bases, such as the price per gigawatt annually for maintenance. Many places they may pay more, they may pay less. It may not be a factor, but more. The price may not be proportional. Some may pay a lot more than some, a lot more per acre. Some may pay a lot less. The drones, I worked under the impression that they would be very consistent as far as their maintenance, or the training would be very minimal, despite the fact that the personnel aspect of drone maintenance may play a larger part. I worked on the basis that basically they were working on searching algorithms all on their own with minimal effort. But if they did require additional maintenance, additional training, updates, etc., that could play a larger part. However, even under these bases, we can see that drones can potentially help lower the cost for maintenance. They can raise the price for, they can raise the amount of output for each solar facility if they put in a lot of the effort. And it's not just on my own research that proves this. Drones are already being used for offshore maintenance for turbines, similar PV cell research, as well as maintenance within even nuclear facilities within pipes and smaller areas. So I believe that with this data, And with more specific research and field testing for each facility, we can find more specific data fitted to each one of these sources. And we can find the extent of effectiveness on a more precise and accurate degree. I know it's choppy, but that was the presentation. Questions?
Thanks so much, Red. Due to timing, we're going to have to skip questions and go
Sure
to
thing.
our last presentation, but thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank
Last
you.
but not least, we have Vikram and Chenzi talking about smart grids and the Netherlands. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cheng Zitian, a rising senior majoring in information science.
And I'm Vikram Hunspal. I'm a rising sophomore majoring in fire protection engineering.
We are honored to be here today to share our RIF project experience. We did an exploration of smart grids in the Netherlands, and our mentor is Dr. Wei Ai from the high school.
So today we'll start with some background information about the smart grid, our resource question, then our three-step methodology, followed by results analysis, conclusion, and then a Q&A. So we decided to focus on the United Nations goals of sustainable infrastructure and climate action. Climate change is a real issue, and we need sustainable, resilient infrastructure that can handle our growing needs. A smart grid, by definition, is a network that uses information technology to deliver electricity efficiently, reliably, and securely. Some proven benefits are faster restoration of electricity in outages, integration of renewable energy sources like solar panels, and reduced costs for both utilities and consumers.
And despite all these great benefits of smart grids, in our project, we are mainly interested in its adoptions and whether their adoption saves energy. And we focused on two research questions. One is how smart grid system developed, and we chose Netherlands mainly because of its data accessibility. And the second research question is what is the grid's impact on energy consumption, mainly on the electricity consumption. Next slide, please. And our data came from Annexus, one of the largest energy companies in the Netherlands, and it covers data consumption of the areas under its administration. And we use the Python Jupyter notebook for the data analysis. There are three main variables we focused on. Smart meter percentage measures the percentage of smart meter, which is the central component and the basic unit of any smart grids in the area. In number connections is the total energy meters, which includes both regular and smart meters. And annual consumption is the electricity consumption in our case. Next slide, please. And this slide shows our main process of analysis. We first, after looking at the distributions of variables, we first explored how smart meter develops over time at the city level in the Netherlands. And then we randomly selected 9 cities to examine the relationship between smart meters and the energy consumption. And after visual understanding, we tried to extend the relationship of all the cities and quantify it. And I will hand to my teammate Vikram to share our analysis results.
So for our first distribution here, the data set, we have a smart meter percentage, and this comes in the form of a U-shaped curve, which means that the data is skewed to 0% and 100%. That indicates that cities either fully committed to installing smart meters or they did not. And it also indicates that cities that did commit, they installed the smart meters at a rapid pace, as there's very little data between 40 and 60%. And our other distribution of the data set is of electricity consumption. And this shows that there are very few large cities that consume a lot of electricity.
And this grouped box plot shows how smart meter developed from 2010 to 2019 in the Netherlands. We calculated weighted average of smart meters and generated 10 box plots in one graph. And as we can see them colored differently, each individual box plot shows the range of smart meters percentage across all the cities in that particular year. And collectively, we could see a general trend that the smart meter percentage growing over time. Also, if we look a little bit closer at each box height, it means the variations of smart meter adoption rate also increase over year.
Here we have our sample of the 9 randomly selected cities. Yeah, we have each dot represents a year, and we connected the dots in order to see any trends in relationship between smart meter percentage and consumption. However, visually, we do not see much of a relationship between the two, as we have some cities such as Spa-Beek decreasing in consumption. However, some other cities such as Wed increased with electricity consumption. And I'll pass it over to my partner, Chenzi, to talk about our progression.
Yes, thank you. Just as Vikram just said, we found some cities show a decreasing trend, but others do not. Therefore, we decided to run a regression analysis to obtain quantified results for all the cities. We used the fixed effect panel regression and got a coefficient of negative 600.2. Although it indicates a negative relationship, the p-value is actually too large for the threshold. Therefore, we cannot say that there's a significant correlation between smart meter percentage and the electricity consumption.
As we wind down, we did see that smart meter installations did increase over time in the Netherlands, which is really promising, as it shows how civilians, companies, and the government work together to support this transition into a more green and sustainable technology. However, we did not see a correlation between smart meters and electricity consumption.
At the same time, we also acknowledge that some limitations during our research projects. For example, we only look at the data and analyze them from the city level. And if we chose another scale, for example, the national level or street level, the results could be or might be different. Another limitation is that there are other potential factors electricity consumptions available, for example, the population size or the variations in between the year, the months, the day, or even the daytime. And those potential factors might also have impacts on consumption and impact our regression results. At the end, we also want to share what we have learned from this great experience. From a city planner and policymakers perspective, we recommend them to be aware of the specific conditions of the city itself to address problems. Preferably to do a case-by-case and study for the specific city they are focusing on. And from the researcher's perspective, especially from I and Vikram, we learn to accept the result as it is. Sometimes the results might not be perfectly matching our original expectation before the study starts, but the experience and treating the results without bias is important.
As we wind down, I'd like to say thank you for listening to us, and a special thanks to our mentor, Dr. Wei. He really pushed us to do better, and is always there if we had ran into any problems. And the floor is open for any questions.
You had a city level analysis. Do you think if you had a neighborhood level analysis, if you had that data available, do you think you'd see any difference?
Great question. We believe we haven't really looked at the city level yet, but we believe there might be some difference in the analysis results because we actually started from the national level, and that level actually shows an active relationship between the smart meter percentage and energy consumption. But because we use the yearly scale for time, and we want to look like into more details about the specific regions, and then that actually led to different results at the city level. And due to the time limit, we didn't actually have the time to look at the smaller scales. But I think you really pointed to a great idea. If we look at the neighborhood or street level, the results might be different.
Thank you.
And if Vikram has anything to add, feel free to do so.
I think you addressed it well.
Did you can even look at other countries, or was it very much centralized in the Netherlands? Your data is phenomenal. Just curious if there was any touch points with other countries at all.
We considered looking at the city of Austin, Texas, because of available data there. But the data was very limited to what we could do. It had like cost and some annual consumption, but it wasn't much you can do much. Like this data set that we found, I thought was really useful, and we do a lot with it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I just want to add briefly, one of the biggest challenges actually the data availability for our project. And we found some data from different regions. They might not perfectly match each other, and it might take time to actually manipulate the data and then try to analyze from the same approach and method. But I think that's definitely one of the future directions we could look into and do further research on.
Fantastic to hear. Great to know about the data availability and problems we have elsewhere. Sounds great. Thank you so much, team. Thank you, everyone, for your fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for our faculty members who have coached, the audience members who have asked questions, and all of the hard work. And a special shout out as well to Joanna, who has organized, coordinated, and managed this entire process moving forward. We really much appreciate everything all of our students, faculty partners have done, and we'll keep everyone updated once we conglomerate all the results in the papers together. With that being said, wishing everyone a great rest of your evenings, and thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Have a great night, everyone.